My name is Angela Romans. I'm a 2019 IFE Fellow and the incoming Executive Director of Innovation for Equity. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's quick conversation with Innovation for Equity. We are talking today about the future of work post-COVID and racial reckoning. And just to give you a brief introduction about Innovation for Equity, we are a network of education leaders across the education ecosystem. And our mission is to improve life outcomes for students needing the most support, initially focusing on Black learners. And we do that by identifying and scaling solutions, innovative solutions that work, and by developing and supporting a network of transformational Black leaders that are supporting education for Black learners from cradle to career. And I am really excited to be here today for this conversation with two of our IFE members, a founder and a really active member, Yscaria Jimenez and André Bennin. And Yscaria, to give a little background about her, Yscaria Jimenez is an entrepreneur, an investor, and a coach. And she splits her time between helping to rewire the labor market for stars that are workers skilled through alternative routes, through coaching entrepreneurs in the global MIT ecosystem, and by investing in promising early stage companies founded by underrepresented founders through the Lab Fund. And her most recent entrepreneurial endeavor was as a founder and co-CEO of LaborX, called the LinkedIn for the Linked Out. And LaborX was recently acquired by Opportunity at Work, and Yscaria is now an entrepreneur in residence there. And then André Bennin, or Dre, is a founder and managing partner at Juvo Ventures. It's a double bottom line venture capital firm that's focused on early stage technology enabled education companies across the education to work lifecycle that improve quality, access, and outcomes. And the name Juvo means to help, to support, to further. And prior to that, Dre was serving as a managing director at the Strata Education Network. So welcome, Yscaria and André.
Thank you for having us.
All right, well, why don't we get into it? And the leading question I have for you today is, what COVID-related changes in education are you seeing from your role and your work? And what implications does this have on the future of work?
So maybe I'll quickly jump in with a few stats, and these are stats from like McKinsey Global Institute, from the World Economic Forum. So the headline is the job landscape is rapidly changing. So like these are earlier stats. So by 2030, like up to 375 million workers, which is 14% of the global workforce, would need to change careers. Due to the impact of COVID, by 2030, like we're seeing occupation transitions may increase up to 25%. Another stat that's like very interesting, like COVID-19 has accelerated automation. So prior to COVID, like we already saw that there was a shift from like in the workforce and like a transition to automation. That's why if you were to speak to any like governor in the United States, like they would say, hey, like we have like X amount of unfilled jobs, but we won't have enough workers to fill them. And another problem or issue that they will raise was like, especially in the heavy manufacturing state, they'll say, hey, like automation is taking over. How do we prepare for it? So to that end, like when you think about automation, about 50% of employers say they will accelerate automation, and 80% will expand digitization of their work. So with that as a backdrop, like the conversation around future work has shifted, right? So from an education perspective, like everything was all about access, then the transition to success, and now like everyone is like piling and jumping into the future of work, and the like COVID-19 has actually accelerated that trend, and now like we're finding ourselves like really like gearing up, and some jobs that did not exist like prior to COVID-19 are existing today. So
yeah, I just wanted to add that I think we're seeing some tectonic shifts in both education and how it impacts the future of work. Mainly, and Andre talked about the digitization of education. And I think a bigger embracing of digital education, blended education. And I think the implications for that is that we now have more openness to more flexible pathways to the workforce, right? So, for a long time, the 4-year degree was the linchpin to getting a good job. People like me and others have been advocating that there are many, many ways for people to get, the skills they need to do a job. And I think now, COVID forced everyone online, forced learning online, that, you're seeing rapid adoption of those models. I think yesterday or a couple of days ago it was announced that edX was acquired. And so you're seeing this digital learning revolution that has a few fundamental implications, meaning you should be able to learn anywhere, anyhow, and hopefully a lot more in a more cost-effective way. And you should be able, with the skills that you get, be able to get jobs now. So you see a lot more employers opening up remote roles or hybrid roles. You see a bigger willingness to drop 4-year degree requirements. And so that's potentially opening up a lot of opportunity for 2/3 of our workforce, which was linked out of good jobs. And so those are the things that I look forward to and where I see a lot of opportunity.
Great. Well, given what you see happening right now, sort of post-COVID or still in the middle of COVID, and everything that's happening at this time, the digitization that Jerry talked about, the sort of opening of pathways that Sky talked about, what kinds of, or can you give examples of kinds of innovations, the highlights of some of the innovations that you see that you think are particularly powerful and productive at this time?
Let me take a first stab, and I know you see a lot of innovation in your role, but so as you mentioned, Angela, I'm now an entrepreneur in residence at Opportunity of Work, leading their product. And as I've been road mapping, thinking about how to strengthen the talent marketplace that we've been building for STARS, for workers skilled through alternate routes. We've been in conversations with a lot of different partners who are doing really innovative things around skill-based hiring. So for me, that is the place where I get most excited about the innovation that I'm seeing. And some of these innovations include, skill-based matching algorithms that are being driven not just by your resume, and a job description, but by quantum labor dynamics. So what is happening, hyper-focused in your state, in your city? How are your transferable skills stacking up to a new potential job? And so, name dropping, at least one of the partners we're looking at, SkyHive, to me is, one of those innovations that are kind of taken off at the right time around the skill-based hiring movement. You see LinkedIn talking about now skill-based hiring. So everyone is kind of getting on the skill-based hiring train. It's really exciting. And so, matching is just one component of innovation. Skills validation and, assessment is also really, a really exciting field. I think the way we're training people also with a combination of digital and robots and, a bunch of other ways to develop people's skills is also, I'm seeing a lot of innovation there. And I'm seeing a big willingness for folks to start working together now to kind of put different pieces of the puzzle to solve, a bigger systems change. So that, to me, it's not like technological innovation, it's more innovation in the way we work. It's like working in silos is not solving the problems at scale that we want to see. And so I'm heartened by seeing for-profit, nonprofits, hybrids just kind of coming together and saying, okay, let's solve this, for the greater economy, for the greater good. So that's also, to me, really exciting.
I mean, I couldn't agree more with Sky. Like a couple of things that we're seeing on our end. So like this issue from an innovation perspective, like it's somewhat multi-pronged. So if you think about it, like I would bucket it into um, on the higher ed side, like you have like institutions that are shifting their models to be able to reflect like skill-based, like learners going into their system to earn like specific skills or micro credentials. So to that end, like you think about and I'll also name drop in a I'll name drop folks that are important to us. So like you have like the like innovators in the space like Western Governors University with a competency-based model. You have innovators like SNHU that's also like they're also doing interesting things, and you're starting to see like some even on the higher ed side, like you're seeing like institution like doing acquisitions, like SNHU acquiring Kinsey Academy, and then like you think about more on the company side, like the pure like technology platforms that are innovating in the space. So for us, like coding bootcamp, like is like when I think about the trend in coding bootcamp, like it's like red ocean, like it's very crowded, but there are adjacent markets that are doing interesting things. So like one of our portfolio companies, SV Academy, like they're focused on sales training, on tech sales training, which is important. You're seeing companies that are innovative around the gig economy jobs that are training learners, and then two more like innovative sectors within future work. Like you have the data side. Like the data side is extremely important. So if you think about what Burning Glass just did with MZ and acquiring them, that's like very important because now that you've combined two market leaders in labor market data analytics that are going to be able to like corner the market and really like provide insights that are invaluable to learners and workers. But then you also think about like companies like Brightheim that are making all of these data sets like interoperable and drawing insights from it that are impacting equity as well. And then lastly, the other component that's like pretty interesting. It's even like if you dive on the policy side, like again, like at the state level, like state are putting together or moving legislation to align workers or learners, like to connect them to the education and work life cycle. So like some states are creating a talent pipeline as early as K-12 all the way to the workforce, and really like putting together measures to really help these learners like go from K-12 all the way to the workforce, or put them in different buckets to accelerate their path to the workforce.
Yeah, and just to double in for 30 seconds on that last point, you're seeing also local, like cities and state governments innovate, not just around like the workforce training and matching piece, but on addressing fundamental needs that workers have around housing, around health, independent on where you fall in the universal basic income philosophy, like just seeing, those experiments happening in a bunch of places. And so that's really exciting too. You're seeing like practice and policy kind of coming together in interesting ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so exciting that you're talking about innovations, in all the different sectors, from the policy to higher ed to matching and other institutional spots for innovation, entrepreneurship, so much going on throughout the ecosystem. Let's build a little bit on Yscaria's last point about focusing on the workers and what they need, and the learners and what they need. And we hear so much right now in the popular media about COVID has democratized working and given workers so much power to decide they want to quit this job they hate or something like that, or change how they work. So what are you seeing in terms of that distribution of power. How has COVID and the sort of awakening after George Floyd's murder, the racial awakening, what has happened in terms of worker power? What are you seeing shifting power toward workers or toward learners in this space?
Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Sky.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, we're seeing a lot of shifts, right? And I don't think there's one thing necessarily at play. I think there are multiple things at play. You will hear some say that there's a worker shortage, that the very generous benefits that the government's giving is keeping people from the workforce, or that people have been cooped up so long that they want to enjoy the summer and not work until. And so I don't know, there might be like a slight grain of truth to all of that, but what I actually think is more fundamental is what we're seeing now is, there was a massive layoff that happened during COVID. And now, the economy in certain pockets is rapidly recovering. And, minimum wage is just not cutting it anymore. It wasn't cutting it. It hasn't been cutting it for so many people for so long. And so, workers, if you put the capitalist mindset on and think about supply and demand, if you raise wages, you will get more workers, right? If you create more quality middle income jobs, you will get great talent. And so I think that's part of what we're seeing here is I read so many stories of particularly small and medium-sized businesses who have gone, whether it's an ice cream shop or a pizza shop or whatever, going from paying $7 or $8 to paying $15 or $18 and going from 0 applications to more than they can handle, right? And so that validates that there isn't a worker shortage. I think there's a shortage of good jobs. And I think as employers rethink the value of entry and middle skill workers, you're going to see that dynamic keep changing. So for me, I hope that's a trend that keeps holding. And so I think that's combined also with the flexibility of saying, desperation is forcing some of them. It's not just like, the principle of like, oh, this is the right way to do business, but it's like, I need to drop degree requirements. I need to increase my wages. And I think now you're starting to see workers value. I think we still have a long way to go, but that gives me hope that we're balancing the power dynamics between workers and employers.
And I agree with what Sky said. Just want to add like a couple of things. So like the conversation at the state level has always been like, how do we recruit like high wage, high demand employees to like set up shop within the state ecosystem. With COVID, in terms of like worker power, like one thing that's like not often mentioned is the need for wraparound services. So like a lot of the economy is reopening. However, like there are still individuals that are not, and there's a trend here, right? So the economy is reopening, yet there's still like unfilled jobs, and there's a reason for that, right? Like you think about wraparound services, there are folks that are still at home. Like you have single moms, you have a single parent household that don't necessarily have like childcare, and they can't go back. I mean, they can't really go back to work because like COVID has forced them in the home, and how are they supposed to go back to work when they have kids that they're taking care of? So like the issue of wraparound services is one that needs to be addressed. Like it hasn't been addressed in the past, but like with COVID, like that discussion would need to be accelerated, and you need to think about like how are we addressing some of these issues so we can, one, like get some of these workers into these like unfilled jobs, but also like as they're going back and filling these unfilled jobs, like how are you providing these services, those ancillary services to really like help them be effective at work. and you address that by solving for that wraparound services issue.
Mhm. Mhm. Right. So we're finally starting to recognize that workers are actually whole people and not just, sort of widgets that show up to get a job, but we're seeing into people's homes and Zoom rooms and seeing their kids and their pets and all of that. And so this time has really opened that up. Love that. Love raising up that theme. And so what does that mean then for employers and how employers should be showing up? You talked about recognizing and providing wraparound services for workers. What are other implications for how employers are showing up right now, or how they should be showing up right now for workers, given COVID, given the so-called racial reckoning, et cetera?
So like I'll do a quick because it's on top of my mind. So if you think about what Rachel Carson at Guild did, like she opened up like a fully funded like on-site daycare for workers at Guild. I think that's pretty powerful. I think like certain companies are starting to think along those lines. But also if you think about like from a race perspective, like the folks that like it's sad but true, but folks that were disproportionately affected by COVID from an employment standpoint were folks that were of color. And how do we solve for that and really help them as they're transitioning back to work. And I think like it's a multi-pronged approach as well, but if you were to pinpoint it as like being able to provide those skills, like when you're when you're hired by an employer, there's a certain period of time that's used in training, and to be able to automate that where like learners or workers are getting employed and really receiving those skills, or getting upskilled like while on site, or getting reskilled while on site, I think is something that'd be pretty powerful in solving some of these issues that we're seeing today.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think what I'm seeing that I want to see more of on the employer side is the willingness for flexible work schedules, right? So if you need to work from home 3 or 4 days, come in 1 or 2 or whatever it is, to kind of meet the needs of the family, that's really important, because to your point, Angela and Dre, we're still dependent on what schools are doing. We're still depending on vaccine, and herd immunity and like what happens with that. And so it affects, the day-to-day decisions of a parent of whether, their kids are going into in-person school, hybrid school, whatever that is, right? So flexibility is key. I also think, Andre, you were touching on this, but, you're starting to see a bigger lean into the apprenticeship movement, right? So how do we not just like try and find 1,000% of like the things we're looking for on day one, but like really thinking hard. It's like, what do I need for this person to start this job? And as an employer, how can I invest in this worker to upskill and train them? And so you're seeing, again, whether by need or by principle, companies are now starting to lean in more around giving those types of services. And then lastly, around, last year you had a lot of Black Lives Matter solidarity statements by a lot of companies. And so, the bills are coming due on a lot of those commitments. And so, one initiative that I think holds a lot of promise is the 110 initiative. You look at Fortune 500 companies, I think about 50 right now have committed to hiring 1 million Black stars, workers, so those skilled alternate routes, into middle wage jobs. We're all watching, we all want to see this happen. And so I think we need more of that energy, right? We need we need more focused efforts on Black and Latinx workers. We need more focused efforts on rural workers. We need more focused efforts on employers also leaning in to help build infrastructure, right? Particularly for rural workers, right? Like we need broadband for all, right? So that's one of the things I'm looking for this new infrastructure bill that, I'm hoping has, some just national positive benefits for the entire country. You're looking at veterans, you're looking at single parent homes, and a lot of these communities, returning citizens have specific needs. And we can't afford to leave all that genius and skill untapped, right? Like we need them to contribute to this engine so that we can keep solving the big problems ahead of us.
Yeah, and let me ask specifically, Dre, on the investment side, what are you seeing what are you seeing right now in terms of things that your work is empowering employers or incentivizing employers or advising employers about how to show up right now in this time?
I mean, for us, like if you think about the way that we operate, so my, both my co-managing partner and my co-managing partner is Maya Sharpley. Like we're both IFE founders, and like these issues are top of mind for us. One thing that's important, like we're VCs at the end of the day, and we have fiduciary duties to our LPs, but like given like who we are, like we're able to like have a keen eye to like like CEOs and founders that are making a difference in the space. And for us, like as we're looking at companies that are in the space, that are making changes, that are innovating, like we're looking for companies that are not only uh, uh, not only impacting the broader learning ecosystem, but also like impacting learners that are Black and Latinx. And we're, as you mentioned at the outset, like we're a double bottom line firm. Like we're looking for outsized return for our LPs, but also like we're looking at the impact story. Like how are you impacting learners? Like how are these learners like gaining economic mobility, like post employment or post training, etc. And maybe to put a finer point on it in terms of like the trends that we're looking at, like one of our specific themes is future work, so like workforce transition and upskilling. And within that, like if you think about, like you can bucket it into like different segments. So you have like companies that are really like helping to upskill and reskill learners, but you also have companies that are on hard skills, and but you also have like companies that are helping to upskill and reskill learners on soft skills. Like one that I think about is it's a company that we invested in that's called Immersion. Like it's an AR VR based training environment for learners to develop soft skills. And then lastly, as I mentioned earlier, like the data component is extremely important, and that's why we made that investment in BrightHive, because like they make data interoperable, but also have a specific focus on advancing equity and tracking equity data, which is extremely important for us. So.
Great, thank you. All right, well, let me just ask one last question, which is about final takeaways. Can you give us any final thoughts or takeaways or highlights around the future of work, where we are in this extraordinary time that we're living in during COVID, during the racial reckoning / waiting for receipts, as Sky said?
I would say that I think we're at a moment that has massive implications for our future and a big opportunity. We had people that, because of COVID brought us home and we couldn't go out a lot. We, because of, systemic racism that we see keep playing out in our phones, our TVs. There was a lot of time for reflection, and I think now is a time for action, right? And we're seeing action, but we don't want to get complacent, right? We want to drive systemic change. We want to drive, institutional debiasing. We want to drive more worker power. We want to drive the shift from low skill versus low wage, right? Like there's a lot of skill. There are over 70 million skilled workers who don't have degrees. We need to tap into that talent force, quite frankly. And so I just don't want us to get complacent and lose momentum as quote unquote things go back to normal. I mean, they're not going back to normal. COVID is still raging and we have variants left and right. But I do see this fatigue with COVID, like people just want to get back out there and go back to business as usual. And so I just want to, keep pushing that this is a very special moment to drive a lot of significant change for both, companies and employers and higher ed. So we just need to keep pushing and keep the momentum going.
Yeah, I'll say for me, it's all about intentionality and the fact that the events of the fact that COVID and the events that surrounded it around racial equity were in parallel, has created a huge momentum shift. And it's time for us, whether it be employers, whether it be policymakers, whether it be innovators, founders, how Yscaria was prior to what she's doing now, or us as investors, it's time for us to be more intentional. You're seeing folks becoming a bit more intentional, but it's not it's a marathon. It's not a sprint, and those changes need to happen consistently, and the COVID and everything that happened around race and equity last year, can't just be a blip in history. We need to take the lessons learned and really put them into action. And if we need to create policy around this, do it. If we need to make investments that are reflecting and that are helping to change the narrative, and again, it's all about intentionality and how we play in that part, how we play in our own part, and lifting where we stand in our own way. So.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. Well, thank you both for this fantastic conversation, and look forward to hearing more and more about how we're all lifting in this time.
Thanks so much, Angela.
Thank you so much.